Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Toronto User Group for Power Systems noontime Zoom chat. Today we have guest speaker Alan Seiden, who's recognized as an IBM champion. Now, Alan is an award-winning speaker and has been called the performance guru of PHP on IBMI. He shares his expertise regularly through his blog, as well as at conferences and user groups such as Common, Magic, the Northeast User Group Conference, Ocean, WMP CPA, and today at the Toronto Users Group. So without further ado, welcome aboard, Alan. You can take it away.
Thank you, Vaughn, everyone who helped organize this. Good to see all the people out there. And yeah, some people are putting questions in the chat. That's fine. And you could just ask them, even if it's not exactly related to this topic. If it's something I might know about, feel free to put a question in there in the Zoom chat. Okay, why don't we just, I'll share my screen. So while I'm sharing this, I might not see if questions are popping in. So maybe just talk and I'll hear you, or put a question and maybe Vaughn could just help monitor the chat in case people are shy and want to write a question. He could just verbally tell me, because I'm going to be looking at my own slides. I probably won't see you doing it. Okay, I'm not ignoring you. Vaughn can help me. All right, great. There. So let's share here. Okay. Okay, you see this? See like one screen here, everybody? Okay. So is that right, Vaughn? Do you just see one screen, or do you see two?
No, we see full screen.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, great. Cool. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Good group here. So let's just let's get started. Just a little bit about Seiden Group. Yeah, I have so many great people. It's not just me anymore for everything to do with modernization, APIs, open source. I have RPG people. You see Patrick in the picture there, good RPG expert. And we love all of that. I mean, sometimes even though I've been, the expertise was built in PHP and the other open source languages, sometimes ILE is the way to go. You know, like nothing beats RPG for speed and efficiency. And sometimes that's the way to go too. So we're kind of conscious of all of that and finding the right solution at the right time. We also do support for open source. We have our PHP distribution, Seiden Community plus PHP, which is for everybody. We have optional paid support, but it's anybody can use it. And then API mentoring and training, Visual Studio Code, all the cool things that come out. We like to be on top of that and learn about it and share information. So as I was saying, for anybody who just came in, if you have a question, just speak up, or if you want to type it, Vaughn can help me know it's there because I might not see it, but you can just speak up also. Nice, good sized group for that. So we'll just cover just first the basics of REST APIs as a refresher, talking a little on security and authentication, then some examples about with all the different popular languages that we have here on the platform, different examples. I just felt there's not one way. There's like you have a lot of options depending on the skills, what you like, how it fits in with your company. You can definitely do APIs no matter where you're at and what tools you have, both consuming and providing APIs. And we'll cover some of these languages, including the RPG and what DB2 can handle. I saw Barbara in there. If she has anything to say, she can chime in, or she can stay anonymous and quiet. If you'd like to be anonymous, I said her name. She can stay quiet and hidden. So what are some common reasons why API is just so popular and really exploding? Because it lets us connect in both directions to external applications and even internally. There's some things that we may not want to handle ourselves in our own applications, like sales tax, which can change, at least here in the United States, can change very quickly, can be very localized. You might want to use a service for that. Payment gateways got really popular, especially during the pandemic. People weren't going out to pay for something, so a lot of companies created linked to self-service payment gateways. And then our IBMI system does not stand alone anymore. There's just these cloud applications coming up around it, like Forest, Salesforce and MuleSoft, NetSuite, and Azure-based systems, and everything you could think of is popping up. And so we need to interact with them. You could just give everybody a password and say, connect to my database and take whatever you want. But it seems better to to learn APIs. And that way we can kind of use some of the logic that we've had, make things easier for everybody, protect our data, and also reach out to those other systems. However, it makes sense for all the parties involved and be really helpful there. Even if you have some technical debt and your database is not exactly modernized, you can still provide an API and give a nice look and feel to your system using an API. It's another layer there. So just API, it's this word or term had many different meanings over the years. It's just basically business capabilities that are exposed for someone else to use in a safe way. It used to be, we used to say API for a direct program call or procedure call, like the old reliable QSend data queue. But the HTTP and web browsing became so successful that we started to mean that, like an HTTP API. In my opinion, HTTP became popular for sending data around, partly because it could get through our firewalls. You know, like when firewalls blocked us, we'd usually let web traffic through. So using the web protocol was very helpful to allow APIs to go through, API traffic. Okay, so the API is usually some kind of request over HTTP that causes logic to be run and returns either XML or JSON, the popular formats we have now. As I was mentioning, the API encapsulates functionality. So no matter what you have, what's that old joke we used to say, like on the internet, no one knows you're a dog or something, an old cartoon. But it's like, no matter what you have, the API can communicate, let you communicate with other systems. I mean, one benefit too is inspiring us to refactor our programs into more modular blocks so that we can expose or make it available as an API. You can't take a whole green screen application and make it an API, but you can take pieces of it and reveal it and expose it and make it available as an API. APIs become reusable. They can be called from all different places, internally, externally, under many different conditions. You can allow other companies and groups, new customers, to integrate with your system potentially. If you learn APIs, you can also adopt the current style of web application based with a JavaScript front end. React and Vue are a couple of popular ones that expect you to have APIs built on your server. The other nice thing is APIs are language independent. That RPG can consume, as we say here, RPG can consume a PHP API or a Node API. And our colleague Patrick Baer did a workshop on this at one of the conferences, where he gave people an assignment to do the same exact API in several different languages. So from the outside, no one can tell what language you use. You could even mix and match. You could have different ones. You could have PHP in one place, Node somewhere else. And if there's something that needs the ultimate those perform very well, but if you need the ultimate, or you may have a reason to use RPG as well. Maybe you have RPG code, you'd like to use that directly, depending on your skill set and what you'd like to support. So that's a nice thing too, language independent. You could use tools, vendor tools, you could do it yourself. There's so many ways, and it all comes out looking the same on the outside. So just some popular types of web APIs. SOAP, I think that's the original popular type. We did that 10 or more years ago, 15 years ago, really popular, still exists, highly structured. It was good for what it was, but there's some other types as well, the RPC, remote procedure call, GraphQL. There's some buzz about that. It's a little like a query language where the client can request a lot of different things from the server. The client has more control over what it requests, but it is kind of demanding on the server to provide all that. So REST is really still the most common and popular. It's based on the principles of HTTP, like the HTTP verbs or methods. It's very natural. REST is very natural to go along with how HTTP works without having to invent too much that's new. So it kind of got popular for that reason. It works very well with HTTP. And the format nowadays is usually JSON strings, but it really could be anything technically speaking, but usually we think it means JSON or talk about it. connected with JSON format. So as I was mentioning, the REST APIs use URLs, just like going to a web page. But instead of going to a web page, you're calling an API that gets executed through the URL. So that's part of what's nice. So any tool that works with a web page address can work with an API, more or less. So the verbs or methods can include get, which is like when you go to a web page, just browse somewhere. It's like getting, listing, retrieving, reading data. Posting is creating a record, let's say, or changing something. Deleting, delete. Put, creating or replacing, and patch is to update a few fields. Those are some of the common ones. Get and post, I find, are kind of the most prevalent. The other thing about REST, because it works over HTTP, it's kind of like a stateless, meaning each request has its own lifespan. Each request passes the parameters and gets data back. It passes the parameters related to the data it wants to see, gets data back. It doesn't really remember what happened before. Each request is new. And with a web page, you can do a lot of things that you can do with web pages. For instance, caching, just the way your browser can cache a web page that has not been updated in a long time. The browser can remember that and give you the same page back. An API endpoint could give you back a not modified 304. That's just like the way a web server does, saying, nope, nothing's changed. And then you don't have to do the whole lookup. So these are all possibilities. I'm not saying you have to do all this, but these are all nice possibilities to give you power and control in the future when you use REST APIs. Okay, so these are what the URLs look like. And we'll go through, as we go through, you'll see more examples of this. But in this HTTPS example.com, a port number, just to get to the web server, you could tell just looking at this that a web server is involved. Then maybe we say API, and the rest is totally up to you, but these are just some standards that we'll tend to follow. V1 is just version 1. It's something to keep in mind with APIs, that you don't just write it once and you're done. You will probably have multiple versions of an API as you develop it. Maybe this is V1, and then you'll have V2. You want to give the recipient who's making the request the chance to update their own code in case you change something. So you may have version 1, version 2, and so on. And then you can deprecate or leave, whatever. So anyway, this says orders, then you maybe pass in an ID to get which order you want. Or you can pass in a filter, like in the second URL where it says on the end status equals active. Lots of ways to do it to get the information you want. But instead of getting a web page back, you'll generally get back some JSON with data that a computer can interpret. This is an example here, getting a delivery. This is based on a real client or a client example that we did. API deliveries, customers, we give a customer number, and that's the customer number and a particular date that we want to search for delivery. This is for trucks out on the road delivering goods to stores. And we want to tell it, we want to get back, okay, for a certain customer number and today's date or a date, what came back? So with that URL, it's the method is get. We're not updating anything, we're just reading. And on the right side, you see the response with a date, a route, a driver, stops, planned stop, the customer name and everything like that, how many were delivered. And that's really all the results of that URL. Assuming we're properly authenticated and we're allowed to do this, we can get that information back. You can see it's a text-based data format called JSON, which a computer can read and parse. Now, next screen will show you how this is used in real life. This is on a Salesforce application that's showing upcoming deliveries. This is not the exact same query, but it's a similar related one. So the Salesforce application it's actually going through MuleSoft, which is the Salesforce integration platform. And then the MuleSoft sends out this API request to the IBMI, what we saw before, basically sends out that URL, and the IBMI has an API that's coded in PHP. It accesses DB2 data, and it provides real-time delivery information, not only DB2 data, but it even goes to another API through like an internal delivery tracker. But what we do is we tidy up all the information. We pull it from the database, DB2, we pull it from another tracker and all that. We make it all nice, and then we deliver it to the client. So in this case, Salesforce has everything in just the format it likes. And that's the data is coming in real time from IBMI using this API. And if we ever needed to change our implementation, or we wanted to refactor some tables or modernize some tables, we could do that without affecting a Salesforce. We could just do that behind the scenes and change our API to do things a different way. So that's really nice. We're not stuck. We're not getting stuck as if we gave somebody direct access to the database. And we make it easier for them too. Okay. So any questions on that part? You just speak up. If not, the next section is about what we call API documentation. This is another excellent feature of modern API design, that we don't have to rely on just talking in words to each other and try to explain things. We have a very precise way of explaining what an API does. When we say documentation, we don't mean the Word documents we used to put together to try to explain what APIs did or what the parameters were. Specifically, there's a specification called Open API, otherwise known as Swagger. It's a document or a file. It's really a file that's written in JSON or YAML. It tells other applications how to call your API, what you expect, what parameters you expect, the types, any validation you expect to do, and so on. You may hear the word Swagger, which is just a version of Open API. And that's actually what IBM's IWS, Integrated Web Services tool, does. It provides Swagger. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see just a snippet of a Swagger or Open API document or documentation. You see it says /users/user ID. Summary returns a user by IDs. That's the human readable description. And then there's a list of what parameters there are. And in this case, it's just one, an input user ID. It's required equals true. Type is integer in this case, minimum 1. And then below that, it goes on to say the possible responses. So that way, the person or computer calling the API knows what to expect. It really saves a lot of time. And there's even tools that will utilize this. And I'll show you a bit of an example there. So once you have that document, you can use it in a tool like Postman. Maybe some of you have heard of that. Because the REST APIs have been standardized so well with this Swagger or Open API documentation, it means that all kinds of tools, you can use all kinds of tools to test an API. You don't even have to write a line of code to test an API. Postman is one of the most popular. It's free, at least at a basic level. You can download Postman and test. If you use Visual Studio Code, there's a Thunder client that can fit in there. This example here is Postman, where you can test whatever you're doing. You actually can import the Swagger or Open API document, and Postman will know exactly what fields you're going to use. Very good for testing. Very easy for testing. Like actually in this example here, it's another one using a Weather Bureau API. And going on their website, it says, we provide a service definition in Open API 3.0, previously known as Swagger. That's correct. It gives you a JSON or YAML format. If you download that file, it tells you everything you need to know about calling the API. Like here for the weather report, it tells you it needs grid points, X and Y coordinates, it tells you what it does. It tells you what possible responses it could give you as well. And down below, there's a little screenshot. When I plug this into Postman, it shows you the parameters like this WFO. It shows you all the various parameters you can type in as you go. So it makes it easy to test, saves a lot of time on testing. And so I'll just stop right there, but that's just the value of these Open API things. You could even theoretically create code. You could actually generate code from an Open API document too, because it defines what the API does. You could generate code from that. So it's very good. And the other way around too, you can generate. Oh, so anyway, let me just stop there. Any questions about this part, this documentation? It's pretty to being efficient in using APIs. Again, the computer can even generate this. Theoretically, you could look at an RPG program and know what your Swagger document should be. Okay, I'm going to keep going on here. Just have a short security chat. I can't go into everything, but I'll touch on a few points and that we'll hit later on in the presentation. And if you have questions, you can ask too. There's one essential thing for security, just as if with a web page, you always need what we used to call SSL is now called TLS. That just means you have that HTTPS in front of your URL. I know you've been trained over the years to always look for that lock, that lock symbol on a web page, but it's the same with API. It's exactly the same. Everything gets encrypted as you send it when you use some kind of, when you use this encryption. There's been some rumor that basic authentication is not encrypted, but it is when you use TLS. I did with my team, I just wanted to find out. So we used a program called Wireshark that shows you everything that's being sent and received from your computer. And I saw on the left side, the left image, you could see everything unencrypted. You could potentially figure out what a password was there. And then we turned on the HTTPS, and on the right side of the screen, it's all binary stuff. You can't make header tail of what it's showing you. So that's the value of using the TLS HTTPS, which we normally have to turn on. That's the essential thing. Then I just wanted to talk about a few other topics here about security, because there's a few different areas. One is about just authentication, which means some kind of signing in. So if you create an API, you need just to make sure that whoever is trying to utilize the API is someone you want to utilize it. So perhaps they pass in a secret key of some kind to say that they're authorized. And there's some pretty easy ways to deal with that. If you have multiple users, it could be a user and password. It's very common. So it all depends on the scale and size of what you want to do and how sophisticated it needs to be, whether it's internal or whether you're opening this up to to a giant audience. And so you may want to do something like JWT or OAuth to generate tokens. And you may even want a third-party token maker. The truth is, in reality, this may not be your decision all the time. We're finding that companies will often have a standard they follow. Say they have a Microsoft AD, and that's the server that they're authenticating against, for example. You may find that happening. So I don't want to say too much. But the other point is, once you authenticate, then you need to give permission to the resources, which you do in your code. Actually, we'll show you some more later about this. I don't want to go too much into it now, but if you have questions, you can ask. It doesn't have to be that difficult, really. So let's start with RPG-centric APIs, and most apply to COBOL. I'll show you a little bit in here. So many people have done great talks on this. Often when I'm at a conference, I'm seeing that Scott Clement is doing some talks. I don't want to duplicate what he did, but I'll give some references to this. First, consuming APIs in RPG. When I saw some years ago that DB2 added HTTP functionality, I got excited, because in my mind, I thought, oh, well, if DB2 can consume an API, RPG can utilize DB2, then that means RPG can utilize an API or consume an API. So, and that's become very mainstream right now. And IBM has even provided an upgrade or an improvement. They had a technique using HTTP get clob. You've probably heard of that as a function in DB2. The original way was through something called systools. It was okay, but it used Java to achieve this, which had problems that come with Java. Just garbage collection, different issues would occur there. There's a newer way using a set of functions in QSys2 library called HTTP get. I gave some references there to that. And that's more efficient and generally better. Scott Clement himself had a wonderful tool, HTTP API. It's the old reliable one. It still works. It's made for the RPG community. There's another way now in RPG to consume APIs. You might want to look at curl. QSH curl is an open source free tool from Richard Schoen. That's a wrapper for curl, the curl command. Curl is an open source popular command that lets you access just about any resource out there on the internet that's available to you using one command. So probably for the ultimate in flexibility, QSH curl may be a good way to go. And I gave a link to a tutorial on it. So if anyone has a question about some of those things, you could ask somewhere in the chat or asking here. But that's the nice thing. When I first started with PHP, I saw companies adopting PHP just to consume an API. I'd see them have an RPG program called a PHP script, and the PHP script would consume the API from somewhere, whatever it was. That's because either they didn't know they could do it in RPG or the tools weren't quite available. But you no longer need to have that extra language in place usually. RPG can consume an API itself, and it's simpler and more efficient if you can do that way. So it's my recommendation nowadays, as long as it's not too complex. Hope this is making sense. So moving along, the DB2 approach, this uses the traditional systools HTTP get clob using that weather service. And if you haven't seen this kind of thing before, you see how pretty easy it is. You pass in the URL that you need, and DB2 will split this up into columns. So it splits up the JSON that comes back into DB2 columns, the way you can use in your RPG program, just like normal data. It's really pretty brilliant. Like this path dot name turns into time frame, dot temperature turns into temp. And you can see we're specifying the type of data, like a varchar 128 or integer or whatnot. And on the bottom, there's a screenshot of how this comes out in an ACS window. So it's nice, you can test all these things without having to write code. You could test this query from ACS and make sure it works, Access Client Solutions, and make sure it works. And once it works, try it in your RPG program. So it's a very, very RPG-friendly approach to consuming an API. There's some other pretty neat things you can do. Our friend King Harrison of K3S, he made an open source. He posted this as open source on GitHub in RPG. He created a utility to upload a file from an RPG program into Slack. I think he did this to put any error messages up in Slack because, like me, his team lives in Slack. We're there all the time. So that way, if you have a message waiting or anything like that, you can post information from RPG into Slack too. It's a nice example if you want to go onto the GitHub site later and check it out. It's all open source RPG. Yes, it's there. And you can do the same thing for Teams, by the way, Microsoft Teams. I have an example. If you want an example of how to send something to Teams from RPG, send me an email and ask me about it, because I have an example of that too. Okay.
Alan, there's a couple of people in the chat are asking if they're going to get copies of your slideshow.
How would you like to do it? Should I send this to you? Should I send it to Vaughn and then you?
Yeah, if you send it to me, I'll make sure that it gets distributed to everybody who's on the call.
Perfect. Yeah, I know there's a lot of links in here, so I'll send it to Vaughn after the call, and he'll distribute it to everybody who is here. Perfect. Yeah, you'll get this. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great question. Great question. Okay. Something that they did later, the same company, they chose a different way. They wanted something that would give them a dashboard, and they were already using the WordPress. WordPress is like an open source blogging platform, which can run on the IBMI and off the IBMI. And he discovered, he's the master of, he'll say himself, he's the master of technical laziness. He doesn't like to reinvent the wheel. And he discovered that WordPress had its own API, REST API capability built in without needing to do any programming. So what he did was he learned how to post the status of jobs that were running into WordPress using their API, and then use one of their plugins called data tables to view it. So this is an example of a dashboard he created. And you can see in the upper right, this is current system message waits. So there's an IBMI somewhere around when it talks about MSGW. And this is another situation where he used RPG to post to a REST API, and then made this nice dashboard to show the status of different jobs and processes and stuff for his customers. So that's pretty cool. It just speaks again about the popularity of REST and how so many tools adopt it. Once you get a standard like that, you can save yourself a lot of time. Now, RPG can also use other languages from time to time if you need to, like we needed to decrypt a string using an algorithm. We probably could have done it in the end in DB2, but I think we found there was a Python package that did this job. So first in RPG, we did a post to get data back. And then we used a tool to call a Python script that did the decryption. So we did a little bit of mix and match here. So RPG doesn't have to stand by itself. You can call other languages along the way. That's one. In addition, there was another case where there was a SOAP API and it was pretty complex. And the vendor provided a Python, an example of code in Python, or an SDK, as we call it. So RPG did most of the work. And then we called some Python simply because it was quicker, because we had a sample that was written in Python. It was a pretty difficult thing. It would have been difficult otherwise. It was downloading a video. This is a screenshot of the video of some kind of picture of a truck accident, but that was through this web service, combination of RPG and Python there. You can also provide APIs in RPG, and this is very fascinating. You don't need other languages necessarily to help you. You can use them, but you don't have to. Integrated web services, I find it gets a bad rap. People criticize it, but I found it's been pretty good for simple cases. The fact that it's supported by IBM, people like that. And it produces Swagger documentation, which is a version of OpenAPI. So it's really decent. I think there's a bit of a learning curve. The user interface is not that straightforward. So sometimes you almost need an expert to show you how to use it, but it actually works. It's pretty good. It doesn't have every type of security option you want and all that, but it handles simple cases well, calling RPG, COBOL, and even SQL. RPG CGI can be done straight. I was pretty impressed by a presentation that Scott Clement did, where he showed without any additional tools at all, delivering JSON through RPG CGI. I always thought that was a bad idea because I thought it would be complex, but really JSON's not that complex compared to HTML. So that was reasonable. There's several vendor tools that are oriented toward RPG. I encourage you to check them out. And then there's something pretty interesting, ILEastic for RPG or COBOL-based microservices, which I'm kind of exploring. I've not done a ton with it, but I'm thinking in my mind, if I needed to do like a high performance API server, I might use it, and we're looking into it. This is just a screenshot of what that looks like. I'm including it because it's open source and free. He has a commercial product on top of it, but this portion is free. It just shows you it's kind of similar to like a Python or a Node in concept, that the RPG program itself it tells you what port to listen on, what the host is, what the statuses are, the format it returns like JSON. This is an example from just a simple sample query here. It's almost like RPG APIs in the style of one of the open source languages. So for people with a background in one of those open source languages, they might like this. It's really the same idea, but you stay in ILE. So I think for the ultimate efficiency, it might be the way to go. And by the way, everything I say, you don't take it as gospel or too literally. This is only a rule of thumb. I'm telling you my current thoughts, and my opinions change, by the way. I look back a few years and I say, oh, I'm smarter now, I think, but in a few years, I'll realize my ignorance from now. So you can always check with me because I may have changed my mind. This is how I'm thinking these days. Architecture is also very important. So if people talk to you about speed, this language is faster than that language, or this is faster and more efficient than that, really step back and think about it, because there may not be that much of a difference all the time. Architecture may be more important than the language you use. I have a little case study here, case study of consuming an API with very high volume. An RPG program was consuming an outside API. The problem was the RPG program was being started and ended every time. And it was pretty wasteful of resources to do that. And so the person went to IBM and said, what should I do? IBM said, well, try language X. Maybe that'll be better. But the client was smart and kind of was skeptical, and had a performance expert, famous performance expert. So maybe you should look at your architecture. Maybe your architecture is really the problem. And we were fortunate enough that the client gave us a chance, company gave us a chance to try and experiment with them. This is the original way that the program worked. There was a loop, like a testing loop, and there was an RPG program that was just processing each request as it came in. So just one program going through, and as each one finished, it did the next one, many thousands going through. Slowest option. Next way, every time there was a request, they launched a new RPG program. They basically submitted a new RPG program to batch every time. So this way that they could run these concurrently, many jobs running concurrently in the job queue. This was faster, but there was a lot of overhead by starting these jobs that would then potentially end. Starting and ending, you know, on IBMI, there's a lot involved in starting a job. Once it starts, it's extremely efficient, but you don't want to keep starting and ending. So what was the winner was data queue that we pre-started, say 10 RPG jobs, and then our testing loop had communicated with them through a data queue, and these jobs were hot, running, ready to go, just receiving quests and calling the API. And this was by far the fastest. It was like 10 times more efficient than the other way, and 100 times more efficient than the single program. This was the winner. They did not have to change languages. RPG did a great job. It was a question of architecture. So think about that when people talk about this or that being faster or whatever. Think about architecture. It's superior sometimes to the language and more important. Okay, again, send questions in if you'd like, any comments. So I'd like to just go over some of the open source languages and examples here because it's just so easy. PHP is excellent at APIs because it was made for the web, and HTTP has everything built in that you need. There's really a couple of really good ways to consume APIs. And there's a simple command or function called file get contents. It's as simple as that. You either give a local file name or a URL, and it pulls in the data and gives it back to you. And then you use a JSON decode to bring it into a PHP array. It's that simple, like 2 lines like that, and you can consume an array in PHP. Extremely simple and very convenient. I could tell you a story of how I used that recently to solve a problem, but I don't want to take the time right now. There's also a curl extension that's built into PHP, which is fantastic. You can do everything that curl does inside PHP. So if you need some more complex logic, like here, there's a header. It's you can see it's a Stripe payment API, and we need to send a token in, an authorization bearer token. And so we do that. We send that in on the header. It's a post. You could do lots of things with curl. So that's for the ultimate flexibility. Providing APIs in PHP is also very powerful. There are some, you don't have to use a framework, but some popular ones is Laravel, Mezio, Slim. I think Mezio is good for APIs, and Slim, very excellent. In fact, there's an example PHP application that's a sample API project. I would actually recommend this as a learning project, whether you use PHP or not, to show all the elements that go into API design. It's by our friend Rob Allen, who works with us. He's an API expert out there. And I posted the link here to the project. It includes OAuth 2, authorization, proper security. And I just gave a small snippet on the screen about, you can see get, he made a bookshelf example, get, post, get, put, and even middleware, which makes sure that security is enforced for authorization. That's what this framework has, its middleware, where you can make sure it always gets added. So when it says authorize, add, that will happen on every request automatically. You can see there's a place to request a token at the bottom. You can get a token and you can send in the token. So it's pretty cool. I was very impressed when I saw this example. You may want to just take a look, study it, and let me know if there are any questions that you have on that. Another PHP example, and for this, we chose PHP simply because we found somebody, well, our client we were working with had PHP already. It worked well for them. And we found a code example, the old software development kit. You find a code example, you're going to use it when no one likes reinventing the wheel. And this Amazon Selling Partner API is extremely complicated. Lots of security in there. So we started with the sample code that this person provided. It was a nice software development kit. These are some examples. There's secret keys, refresh tokens, keys and tokens all over the place. And even then, we still had to call Amazon to ask them what was going on because reality didn't match documentation. And that's something you'll find. It's like the old days of EDI. when no matter what was documented, you weren't quite sure if that's what you'd get. It's still true. You still have to sometimes call them and find out. That's why I said security by obscurity. We had to call them and say who we were. But in the end, it's working. It's working well. And PHP was very good for this task. Again, questions, just throw them in. Python, also excellent for APIs, in this case, providing APIs. There's lots of tools. Flask is a good one. There's another good framework for APIs called Fast API that we're getting interested in. But this is, you can see a link here that you'll get in the slides that has an IBM website done in Flask. And in addition, there's additional packages, all free and open source, that add support for APIs. And one that we like is called RESTX, Flask RESTX. It creates Swagger documentation, everything you need. And down below is a little bit of a code snippet with the routing. Like in this case, you can see there's a get and there's a put. Bringing in Flask. Now there's going to be here's more of a case study here. This is a kind of a client of ours, although he did all this work himself. I called him one day, hey, Austin, what's going on? What have you been up to? He said, well, I just created a framework for REST APIs around our RPG code to serve our MuleSoft and Salesforce. And it's automated, does everything, and I uses the toolkit too. Oh, that's all. Okay. Show me, you got to show me. So he did a demo of what he achieved. And it was really quite remarkable, done all in-house, all with open source tools. He preferred Python as his language, so he used the Flask framework and Flask RESTX. I was happy to see he used the iToolkit, which is something I help maintain, to call his RPG and CL programs. It does everything he needs in terms of calling basically any program or procedure that he has from Python. So it let him have APIs over HTTPS, lower maintenance, unlocking data in a modern development stack, Python, what he liked, while not throwing away. He's not throwing away his RPG. And this is a young fellow. He can do it all, RPG, Python, everything. Some more about that in this Flask RESTX tool. It provides a user interface for the API. So here it's kind of nice. You can see, this is an example, but it shows all the different verbs and methods you could have and what APIs are provided based on the Swagger Open API document. So it gives you a nice user interface for that. He built a tool where if he typed in what his data types were for his RPG parameters, it would build, it actually built the toolkit call. It actually created code from the parameters he typed in. You can see on the left side, it's a form he made. And on the right side, it shows that the toolkit call to call the RPG program and the various parameters there. It creates a port number. It really does a lot to automate the process. It was very good for him because that way, if the MuleSoft and Salesforce people say they need something else, it's a very quick process for him to create a new one. It's not a one-time thing. This keeps going. It's pretty cool what he did. Very nice. He used security protected by JWT tokens here. In Python has a package to do it. Pip install JWT. Actually, he has a couple of blog posts on this. I'm not sure if I included the links, but if I didn't, you can ask me for them and I'll show you the blog post that he put in there. This is all the security part. It's pretty good, pretty good. One more thing, not to be satisfied there, he actually created a dashboard that shows, lets him start and stop each API. And it lets him actually see the status of them as well and how much CPU they're using. That you can see here, this is custom code that he did. So it's showing each API. You can see there's a start and end for each one, the job name. Now down below, there's something he could have improved on here, which I should probably tell him about. You see there's all those job names, QP0Z, SPWT. It's a very generic name. Those are Python APIs. There's a way in IBMI to give those a name. There's an environment variable you could set. I've got to tell him about that, which I actually just learned about that at the Common Power Up in Denver. I learned about that from somebody. So you're always learning new things here. That's pretty good, right? I was impressed. So I had him do a demo and he gave me permission to show this. His name is Austin Moore. I think he's going to go places in IBM land. Okay. Question. So let me go on to Node here. I know you're having your lunch hour. Node.js, it's kind of similar to all the others. It can be a consumer. Yeah, from Node version 18 and higher, there's a function or a method called fetch. And you can see here, these are all from real actual projects we did. I knew I couldn't cover everything in the world about APIs, but I could cover what we're looking at now and current trends. I figured that would be topical. So this is from a Node application where we're going to this payment service called Repay. And you see we're specifying the URL and then whatever headers that it requires, secure tokens and things. Really the same as the other languages pretty much, but this is the current way to do it. So as far as providing an API, Express is a very popular Node.js framework. And this is the index page. You can see it specifying the port number and then get, post, like what to do for the various verbs that come in. This is a very simple example. Okay. It's sort of the same thing in all these different languages, really. But here's a little bit more complex one, authentication example. Do you remember when I was talking about security that you often find there's a corporate standard for how you have to do things? And we're finding Azure AD is a popular one. And so you need a way to kind of have the credentials go through that to authenticate a user. And we found there was an NPM module. With Node, the catchphrase is there's always a module for that. So you look for the module that does what you want. And we installed this one called Passport Azure AD, and that did the work of going to AD to authenticate to it. Here's just a little bit of code of how we did it, of what we did to do that with Node. Although, as I said, you're fine. You can probably do a lot of what you want to do with RPG without needing other languages. But these all are good, and they all have their place. Every single one, PHP, Python, Node, can do a lot depending on what you need to do. So I think those are basically my slides here. So I don't know. I just want to ask you. I think I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you out there. And I want to know what do you remember? What will you try to use? The fact that if you're ready to consume APIs and provide them, then the IBM is a role forever. The database is incredible. You can add your business logic and modern API architecture. So I'm going to just temporarily stop sharing, and I'll share at the end for my kind of contact slide. But was there anything here that kind of caught your attention that you didn't know or that you might want to try?
Say, Alan, don't forget the question from Glenn Gunderman.
Didn't I answer that? Oh, I should say it.
I don't think so.
I did answer it. Oh, Glenn.
It's right at the beginning of the chat.
Okay, I'll say I did answer it, but maybe you don't see that?
Oh, you answered it in the chat.
Oh, I'll say it verbally. Okay. Glenn was saying he was using Yum, and he basically upgraded his release, IBM release, and the open source package manager gave an error. RPMDB opened failed, and it said that he had to rebuild RPM. That RPM database somehow gets corrupted from time to time. I haven't seen it as much recently. IBM may have improved that, but anyway, it's not that much of a problem. I give the command in there. It's called RPM rebuild DB. You could run that command from like an SSH. And if you're on the Access Client Solutions, you go to the Utilities menu and click Rebuild RPM Database. It occurred frequently enough that IBM added a Rebuild RPM Database option to it. Those are two ways to do it. So that's not a big deal. It's not really that much of a problem once you know how. So just run one of those, Glenn, if you're here. Or you're not here, Vaughn can relay that back to you.
Not here, but he'll probably watch the recording. So thanks.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. All right, what else? Sometimes if I cover a lot of material, I like people to say what they remember, because that way it kind of like refreshes people's memory. So did you learn that all these different languages can both consume and provide APIs, and that RPG has these really cool DB2 functions that can do it? as well as the famous HTTP API. It has QSH curl. That's another nice way to do it. It can provide APIs through IWS, through plain RPG, through vendor tools, through other newer tools that are coming up for the like ILEastic. That's pretty nice. That's efficient. That you can do it with PHP. You could consume an API of PHP with 2 lines of code and convert it to an array. Python and Node are similar. And you can provide APIs. There's a sample complete application in Slim, in something called framework called Slim. In the slides you'll get, there's a link to that, which is a full example. No matter what language you're using, that could be an educational tool to see how it really happens and how the authentication is done as well, using Slim framework. That you can be prepared for anything you encounter. If they tell you, look, we have to use Azure AD as your authentication server, no problem. You can find a way to do that. And we give an example here. They say create your own, no problem, you can do that. You can do things extremely simply. With IWS, in one situation, our security options are limited, but we had the client pass in like a secret token through a header, and we could validate based on that. So there's a lot of ways to do things, and it's not that difficult. And by being ready to do this, you can be prepared without giving away. You don't have to give away the keys to the kingdom. You don't have to give everyone all these external people an ID and go and create mayhem on your system. You could create an API and control things, as well as getting real-time data. Gone are the days when you have to give an extract, a summary and stuff. You could, when people want real-time data, APIs are the way. Okay, any other questions, thoughts, any challenges that you currently have here?
If you have a question, don't forget you have to unmute yourself. I've got everybody muted.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, or if you just want some background on APIs, when you get the slides, you'll have it. You can refer back to that. It's a reference for you. If the need or opportunity comes up, you can check out the slides and get there. Or if the opportunity comes up after 2 years, check with me to make sure I didn't change my mind on anything. But it's pretty much classic material here. Anything else? RPG experts? Anything to add? You don't have to. It's okay. I assume, by the way, your agreement is assumed if you don't say anything. All right. So I'm just going to share one more time and just share my last slide here. It's like my getting in touch slides. Just a moment. Just going to do that. This is my final slide for contact. I mean, Vaughn may have some announcements potentially, but this is my final slide here. That we have a monthly set of tips, seidengroup.com/tips, all new things that we're coming up with all the time. And a reminder, we do offer open source support in our community plus PHP. I should also mention, if you don't mind, Vaughn, there's another conference, Ocean TechCon, at the end of July in California, and it includes a CIO summit, leadership summit. So if you are or know any IT executives who would like to have some networking with their peers, see that they're not alone in whatever issues they're dealing with or questions they have. I'm going to be leading these CIO summit sessions. We're going to have IBM executives there to answer questions, and we're going to facilitate a conversation where they can ask the questions and talk about things. It's not going to be like official IBM story. It's going to be other executives and leaders talking to each other. It's very good so they can speak their mind and share solutions that have worked for each other. And I don't mean just technical solutions. I mean solutions, how to talk to the business, how to negotiate with the business, how to get requirements, how to deal with the things that come up in IT and IBM and so on. So I think it's really nice. So that's, anyway, you can check on the Ocean website if you're interested in that for the end of July. And I think it's actually free. That CIO part is free for executives, and they can send other people to the conference. Just want to throw that in.
That sounds great, Alan. Great.
Okay. Good.
I'll I'll make an effort to pass that along in one of our email announcements coming up.
Great, great.
So I guess that's it for today. Thank you so much, Alan, for your interesting talk. It was really great. We had 24 people on the call out of 32 who were registered, so pretty good turnout. And just before we go, I might want to add that on July 19th, we have another Zoom meeting. This time will be with a couple of speakers from ARCAD. Mark that in your calendar. It'll be noon again on Wednesday, July 19th.